considering or wouldn't want to get involved in, so that you can kind of look at it from a fair set of eyes. And yeah, you're not already invested into that idea, haven't already kind of got a preconceived design in mind. So just the themes behind each of these things I'll go through. So the first one, just looking at this kind of idea of a walking or running application, the trail application, is that, think about Cape Town. We've got, you know, this kind of wonderful landscape, this great environment, great outdoors, and all these kind of places we can walk and explore. And obviously a lot of people just rely on maybe their friend telling them that this is a good route to follow, or they go there and they do it themselves. But also you have a lot of people who maybe don't really exercise because it's this very daunting experience. So perhaps, you know, some system or application that would give them a helpful guide, maybe almost gamify the process, all these kind of different ways of making it kind of more accessible and easy for different people. Then there's this idea of an insect farming system, and this is kind of a very futurist idea, but I read a lot recently on how insect farming is becoming quite an important thing, because the beautiful thing about many insects is that they can eat almost anything that they can use to grow, but all the things that they eat then end up being cleaned inside of them. So by the end of it, insects, you know, are grown, but you can feed them anything, and then those insects could be used for several purposes. So apparently insects make good feed for animals, and it's far cheaper to use insects than to use grains and other types of things. So that could kind of require less space and cost to farm animals. But also insects can apparently, you know, they're apparently very nutritious. And if we were to create like a kind of tasty treat and remove the stigma from it, it could also revolutionize how to feed people in the world and help with hunger crisis. So maybe some system that helps people participate in that insect farming kind of ecosystem could be interesting. On the note of a COVID-19 reliable news platform, we've seen a lot of misinformation being spread during this time, because there's so many sources of news. You have your news apps like News24, but you've also got Facebook, you've also got, you know, things being spread in WhatsApp groups, and it becomes quite intimidating to understand what's true, what's not. So some form of platform that could maybe help people sort through that, or maybe verify things that people have read over WhatsApp, could be really helpful. On to the next one, Xavier, data efficient e-learning platform. As we've had to move to this online learning model, we've had to resort to watching lecture videos, maybe live or maybe recordings, or maybe going onto YouTube. But that requires quite a lot of data. And as much as we think that maybe YouTube would be top of the line and very efficient, turns out that there are actually certain algorithms that are way more efficient. So the number of megs you're using per minute of streaming can be way lower on other systems that aren't actually in common practice. So for somebody to maybe take advantage of the systems that are better in that regard, and maybe make some form of e-learning platform out of that, it could be really helpful to people that are in areas where they don't have access to bountiful amounts of data, and also don't have access to, you know, fast internet. Looking at student productivity, this is, you know, a crisis all the time, but especially now, it's very hard to balance all your responsibilities as a student. You're often maybe working on the side, you've got your university work, you might have family commitments and other responsibilities, and it can be easy to drown in that whole thing. So maybe some form of kind of really smart system that understands you and your responsibilities and can plan your days for you could be really good, especially during this period where we don't have lectures to hold us accountable. We have to organize our own routines. And then looking at the idea of kind of SAST digitization or organization, I'm not sure how many of you have had these experiences with going to the police, but a lot of police records are still kind of in paper format, which means that they could get lost in the system, they could be difficult to find, or if you are on holiday in another part of the country and get arrested, you could go to the SAPS near you and they don't have the digital version of your record, so it's very hard to work through that. And this is, you know, very outdated because we're in a digital world these days. It seems silly to still be having these very paper-aligned systems, but all sorts of technologies, such as even blockchain, are providing ways of efficiently and securely storing data. And the dream is that one day you can go to any police station in the country and be sure that they'll have your records, they'll easily find them and be able to help you. So it doesn't necessarily have to be SAPS, but there are many different kind of systems and services in the country that are still paper-based, that are still inefficient. So something that could maybe make that a bit easier. And finally, looking at the concept of an online art gallery, And again, this is something that I think many people are experiencing right now in this crisis, is that the traditional means of maybe selling your product and making money and making a living aren't available. Art galleries are a long way away from being opened up again because they're a kind of public activity. So how do artists to maybe make their income off that? How do they now kind of navigate through this time? Maybe they go onto those kind of like online kind of stock photo sites or places and put something up there and hope for donations. But what happens if they could almost sell their art online so that when the lockdown ends or when things ease up, they can then, you know, maybe deliver their painting to a person and in the meantime get paid. So something like that could be really helpful. So those are just kind of briefs to the themes we have, and it's up to you to see where you want to take it.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. I think just again, coming from the outside into this particular process, it was really amazing just to see the variety of applications that could potentially be made. And so this was just randomly picked and trying to give a broad overview of, or broad spectrum of the different types of apps that could exist and how people are coming to this. Just in terms of the type of, I'll go through I'll mention the names of the apps that we'll be focusing on today because of the number of students who are here, our participants who are here, and then also I'll explain what will happen just briefly. So just for Bilqis, we'll be looking at numbers 1, 3, 4, 5, and 7, just so that you know. So to those who are here, we'll break you up into those 5 groups. You will be given a set of questions, which you can see, this is for us, but you can see what these look like. They're just 4 to 5 questions that we're going to be asking you throughout the duration of your getting to know each other. And we want you to, well, we invite you to experience, expose yourselves, you know, be vulnerable and respond to these questions and have a conversation, get to know each other. So Bilqis, if I could ask you to start breaking them up, if that's okay.
Okay, cool. I am working on it. Let me just see.
So while we're waiting on Bilqis, the first question will be to share your name, studies, and the feeling today. That will be your first question, and that is just to break the ice, meet each other, share something, and then we'll start off with just dropping the second question, and you can think about this now. If you could grab one superpower, which one would you pick and why? And so we'll start off the conversation with those questions, and then thereafter, after 5-6 minutes, we'll broadcast the next question for you.
Okay. Okay, so everyone has a room now.
Cool, you should be able to submit or put them into the rooms and people will start dividing up. We are good. Everyone can hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, we can hear you.
Amazing, cool. Okay, so that was a really interestingly messy process, which is always good because that is designing, that is something that comes along with the process. I want to thank everyone for being a part of that and just being present and having those conversations. I tried to jump into some of your groups just to see where you are and just to give the next question. Apologies for the break in handing over those questions. Broadcasting wasn't playing along with us. But I just wanted to open it up, and especially the conversation or the question about the cabin, the dark cabin and the lighting of the fire. I want to know what people's responses are. If you could just have maybe 1 to 2 people share via voice, and if anyone wants to text anything in the chat and give their responses, we can definitely do that. I also, while you're thinking about what you'd want to respond, I want to note just the timing. We have about 19 minutes left. What I'm going to be doing after this is going straight into content. And so what's going to happen is that I will go through the brief content to the design thinking process, the questions we ask, and for you to think about certain things in relation to the groups that you're in. And then in the second session, we'll go deeper into that process and ask specific questions that gets to the heart at what you're wanting to create. That's just in terms of administration. Is there anyone who wants to share just just about the questions and people's responses and the differences or the similarities to those responses?
So Uzair, I think some might not have received that question.
No, they should have. I've been in all of the groups, and that was the question I posed to everyone, so it should be fine.
All right, I'll kick it off because I know it's difficult to talk to like 20 people. So yeah, in my group, we started off just thinking like maybe if we had to absolutely choose one, what would we choose? And the first suggestion was that maybe there would be a lamp, because the lamp is something that could provide some warmth and can provide some light. It would last longer than the match, but than the candle, but it would also not be as audacious as the fireplace. So that could be like the safest choice, and maybe not to attract the zombies. Another suggestion was actually to light everything. So to maybe use the match to light the fire, use the fire to light the candle, use the candle to light the lamp. So then you've got everything, you're super warm, you're super bright, but then the zombies are definitely going to be coming for you. Yeah, that was kind of what we came up to.
Yeah, amazing. So thank you for that. And I do realize that people might be a bit feel awkward in sharing in big groups. That's perfectly fine. But the point of that was to just show that people see situations differently. People will experience those situations differently, and their outcomes or their solutions will be different depending on their perception. And so it's for us to be aware of what that is and how that functions in real time. And so when creating anything, it's for us to acknowledge the differences that will be displayed, that will come to the forefront. I'm going to now jump straight into why we are all here. And so again, I thank you for just being a part of this process. And I'm just going to share my screen again so that we... Bright says, stay in the dark, stay silent, and wait for the zombies to pass. Completely. That was an extra aspect, right? That was another variable, that there were zombies. And so zombies are attracted to heat. If anyone watches The Walking Dead, that's something that happens. And it's, again, it's to look at all the different aspects, all the variables that are at play for us to even begin thinking about what this looks like. So content. This is where I take over and just starts speaking. Again, I'll go through the brief process. So here you might want to take notes, and we might go 5, 7, 10 minutes over time. I wanted to give time to just the conversations and the getting to know each other. So if you're needing to leave at past, by all means, you can sign off. But I think just being aware of timing, we might go over, and I want to just acknowledge that as well, just in case. So again, what is design thinking? I think this is a broad question, but design thinking is essentially a user-centered approach to problem solving with the following ingredients. It's human-centered. Now, empathy for the people you're designing for and feedback from these users is fundamental to good design. You center the human, you center their experience, and also you get their feedback as to what you're designing in order to create a good design. You are mindful of a process. You know where you are in the design process, what methods to use in that stage, and what are your goals. You're constantly aware of this process, but also noting that this process is iterative. So you can jump in between stages, and we'll go through what those stages are. Show, don't tell. Design thinking is really interesting in that it tries to communicate one's vision in an impactful and meaningful way by creating experiences, using illustrative visuals, and telling good stories. Now, you can't have a good story to tell if you haven't centered the human and the experience at the core of your design. You're biased towards action. Now, design thinking is somewhat of a misnomer. It's named incorrectly. It's more about doing than thinking. So this bias towards doing and making over thinking and meeting is at its core. You're wanting to do your research, to engage, to investigate in order to produce something worthwhile, for it to go through a process of prototyping, testing, to create something that is beneficial for a group, a society, a community, whoever they are. There's also the focus on radical collaboration. Now, here we try to bring together innovators with varied backgrounds and viewpoints. You enable the breakthrough insights and solutions to emerge from the diversity, that will be emerged from the diversity. Now, that radical collaboration can only happen when you know who is in your team, where they come from, what their background story is, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and to be open and blunt about that. There's no point in working on a project and coding needs to happen, and you know you struggle at coding, but someone else in your team is a master at it, but hasn't said anything since the beginning. You need to be open and you need to be able to collaborate. And that doesn't mean in your immediate team, but also stepping out of that. Who could potentially collaborate with you in the broader society that might not even be aware of what you're wanting to create? You need to keep an ear to the ground. Lastly, there's the culture of prototyping. Now, prototyping is not simply a way to validate your idea. It's an integral part of your innovation process. We build to think and learn. And you'll see that part of this design thinking process is that you prototype and you test. But you prototype in order to get feedback as well, to always improve and develop on your idea. Now, the design thinking process is as follows, and we'll go through the immediate, how do you say, the individual stages of this process. There's the empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Now, I was told by everyone, well, by the powers that be, your committee members, leaders, that the challenge that you've taken on, or that you've undertaken with the development of certain apps, you are at the ideation phase, or you're moving to the ideation phase, which is wonderful. If you're having a look at this process, you'll be able to see that through employing this process, you'll be able to go back and forward, and we'll go through how that looks. Now, I just wanted to bring someone in here. Nigel Cross in 2007, and he's the author of the book Design the Ways of Knowing. He's a British academic, researcher, educator from the UK. He said, everything we have around us has been designed. Design ability is, in fact, one of the three fundamental dimensions of human intelligence. Design, science, and art form an and not an or relationship to create the incredible human cognitive abilities. So it's not employing design or science or art, or design and science or art. It's not an or relationship. You need, in terms of this design thinking process, you need to have design and science and art in order to really create something worthwhile. Now, that's not to say that other creations are not worthwhile, but if we take a moment and really ask ourselves, the apps that we've downloaded on our phones. I know I've downloaded a number of apps, games, and language learning apps since I'm a linguist, and I try to see how user-friendly it is. And just within 30 seconds of engaging with these apps, I sometimes delete it because it doesn't speak to me. It's not user-friendly. It doesn't take my way of being into account. And there are some apps that are really amazing. And there's just that feel to it that, you know, as a user, this is something worthwhile. Now, a side note, just in terms of what they mean by science, art, and design, and this and relationship between them. Now, science is finding similarities among things that are different. If you just think about it, science finding similarities amongst things that are different. Art finding the differences amongst the things that are similar. And design is creating feasible wholes from infeasible parts. And I'll just leave you with that. So the process is as follows, and we'll go through the individual process, individual stages, and what we need to think about in these different stages. And then we will have some brief reflections, and then we will end the session. So the blue, which is the empathize, can be broken up into understand and observe. We have defining the point of view, which is the next stage, stage 2. Stage 3, ideate. Stage 4, prototyping. And then stage 5, testing. Now, these are the 5 stages. Remember, empathize can be broken up into, or it's the sub stages as that is understanding and observing. These are the 5 stages as represented by these colors. But I want you to note the lines that are connecting the different stages. This speaks to the iterative process of it, that you can do the understand and observe, and then move to the defining point of view, and then moving to the ideate. There might be an issue with your ideation. You can move back to the point of view and even back to the observe. Taking back, see what you've done, and realigning your research, realigning your point of view to then further this process. So now we'll go through the specifics. With empathize, and this is what we tried to get out with just breaking up and really giving time to you speaking with each other, because I'm unaware of whether everyone in this group knows each other. I'm not sure if people understand what people who they are, what everyone else is studying, but also having some form of insight as to if there's a zombie horde, if you're in a cabin alone, what do you do? And I think that tells you a bit more about the person. And sometimes what they say resonates with you. Sometimes you're like, but why are you saying this? And you begin to engage. But through that engagement, you begin to understand who this person is. So you're essentially investigating through asking questions. You're investigating why this person thinks this way, and you try to empathize. Can I get on this bandwagon? Do I really understand where this person's coming from? Why this person has said this? So with the empathize stage, we're searching for rich stories and finding some love. Now, some of you would have already done some form of research, but you need to ask also, have you empathized through that research? Here we're wanting to learn about the audience and whom we are designing by observation and interviews. And in that observation and interviews, we're essentially looking at what people are, not only what people are saying, but what they're thinking when they say this. What are they physically doing when they're saying this? Some people are fidgety when they respond. Some people look down when they're saying certain things. Some people get angry. What is the embodiment of their response? And also, what's the feeling associated with what they're saying? We need to ask the question, well, who is the user and what matters to this person? Who is the user and what really matters to this person? Sometimes it's easy to just take a blanket statement or take a phrase about what someone has said and use that as your departure point. But the question is, have you really understood what this person is trying to get at? And that requires you to ask further questions, not necessarily agreeing with what this person is saying, but get into the core of what this person means when they say this. Through understanding, and if you just go back, through understanding, which is one of the first bubbles, which is still a part of empathize. Through understanding, we are gaining an understanding of the challenge, the relevant topics, and stakeholders. Through the observation, we want to understand the needs, the struggles, and potentials of users and stakeholders. So when we look at COVID-19, and some of you are part of that group, when we look at the COVID-19 or the other disaster reliable news platform, you need to ask yourself, well, who's at the center if we're going to develop an app that deals with disaster reliable news? In terms of your online art gallery, if this is going to be an online experience, whatever that online experience is, who is at the center? Who is the user? And what really matters to this person? What is the challenge that you're trying to get at or trying to address? Who are the stakeholders for both of these? And that applies to all the groups. The next part is the define. Now here, you're somewhat now coming in and you're wanting to get to a point form. We're looking at the user needs and insights, their point of view. The more specific you are, the better. We're synthesizing all the information that you've done in the previous step and defining a unique problem focus from the user's perspective. We're creating one point of view that is based on a user's needs and insights. And so if you've spoken to 5, 10 people, 100 people, and they all have these different experiences, you will sift through all of those experiences, see what resonates with the challenge, with your brief, and center that single person's needs at its core in the development and in the further processes. And essentially what we're asking here is, what are their needs? So the previous step, we're moving out. we are exploring. Through this defining the POV, we're coming together and we're centering it with one person's experience, one individual's experience and their story, essentially. Now, how would this look for the data-efficient e-learning platform? Who is the person, the being, the experience at the center of creating a data-efficient e-learning platform? And the question that we need to ask is, well, what are their needs? What are we needing to address? Now, the Ideate is an amazing stage, and I think a lot of people who employ this, the design thinking, have fun with Ideate. Ideate, you're essentially just coming up with ideas. There are no limits to your ideas. You will brainstorm and come up with as many solutions as possible, and those solutions can essentially be anything. I just saw a message. I just want to address that immediately, if that's okay. POV stands for point of view. So if we just go back, we're wanting to look at the user needs and insights, their point of view, their experience, their way of being. What is the point of view in the challenge in your developing of an app or any online platform? If I may continue, and again, ask any questions. If there's anything that's uncertain or that I need to, or if I need to explain anything, please do ask. Again, this is for your benefit, and this is for you to take as much as you can out of it so that you can be the best designers. And that sounds really cliche and very awkward, but for you to be the best designers that you can be, knowing that these processes exist. Sorry, I was at the Ideate phase, I digress. With the Ideate, again, we're coming up with as many ideas as possible. We're brainstorming, essentially we're brainstorming solutions, and those solutions are not defined by the physical world. Be creative, think outside of the box, actually remove the box and just think and be and explore. Your imagination here is extremely key. It's important. Literally, the limits to your ideation process is your imagination. Do whatever you can to just randomly come up with stuff. And here you can doodle, visualize for presentation, but wild ideas are encouraged. If they seem far-fetched, if they seem as if it's something that I don't know, Tesla wouldn't even think about, or what are these high-tech Silicon Valley companies, whatever they're doing. Even if you think that not, it wouldn't find a space or a room in that realm, it doesn't matter. That's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for wild, I shouldn't say crazy, I take that back. We're looking for wild, out of this world ideas that could potentially be a solution. And the question we're asking here is, what could possibly or even impossibly be done? What could possibly or impossibly be done? And so if it's a flying car, have that as an idea. If it's something that doesn't exist yet, put it onto paper. And usually what happens at this process, if you have small pieces of paper or sticky notes, I don't know, 7 to 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, that might be a bit too big, even smaller than that, sticky note size, just sit, take 10, 15 minutes, and with the Koki or pen, whatever comes to mind in relation to your challenge, write it out, take that sticky note and put it on a wall. Write the next one, take the sticky note and put it on a wall. Get everything out. That's one point, that's one way of visualizing. You can't work with anything if it's stuck in your head. Draw it out of you, even if it has to be physically. So having a look at the student app. the student productivity app. What does that actually look like? What ideas could you come up with that? What could you come up with? You know, could there potentially be an idea where this app is linked to my actual body, and my body responds and connects directly with that app? Biology, science, your imagination is your limit. Second last stage is prototyping. Now, this stage and the next stage, I think, are really, well, I think all of these stages are important, but these stages are key. Now, one way for people, and you probably all know this, but one way for people to actually get onto your bandwagon or your trail or into your boat in what you're wanting to sell is to prototype and test and get feedback and develop, improve, and then continue that process. We are in design thinking, we are building to learn. Here, we want to build a representation of one or more of the ideas to show others. And so in your ideate phase or stage, you might have 7, 10, 75 ideas. Get your top 5. Prototype these, build it. However similar they are, however different they are, build it, prototype it. You need to show your idea. You need to also remember that this prototype is also just a draft. So you're taking this prototype as a draft, and those peoples that you initially interviewed, that content you got at the beginning, those interviews, those conversations that you've had with peoples in certain spaces, whether it was random or whatever, go back to them, because they will essentially be your user, right? So you take these prototypes and you're going back to these and you're showing them this idea. But the point of showing them this idea is so that they engage with it, they connect with it, and they give you feedback. But before we even get to that feedback, this prototyping can take the form of, some of you might know, online platforms, Keynote, which is one way of one website or application that engages with visual representation. Prot is another one. But if you're not as high tech and tech savvy and computer literate as such as me, you could also just use storyboards. Oh, I see we have a. You could also just use storyboard, or you could even act it out if you're not if you don't know, if you're not wanting to use any tech. What could also happen, what used to happen, is that we used to use Lego. I know when I did this, we had access to Lego, and so we used Lego as a means to prototype some of our ideas, and we went back to our constituency and we asked them engage with it. And this is the testing phase. And I think this is the last phase, and then I'll open up for questions or any responses. But then we have the testing phase. And the testing phase is essentially showing and not just telling. You're wanting to test with others, and this can be within your own group or even with your constituencies or with people you think might use the app. But when you're testing, you're not trying to justify what you've just created. That's not the point. The point is for whoever is being used as a tester to give feedback. That is the most important thing. You're just there to present your prototype and for them to give you the feedback that you will then use. But what you're looking for specifically when you're testing is to share is to ask the questions and harvesting the responses. And these questions are: what worked? What didn't work? What questions do those peoples have about my prototype? And also, do they have any further ideas? Now, those last two, again, important. I think this whole process is important, but it just becomes more important, because numbers 3 and 4, more questions and capture ideas. Those questions that those peoples have that you're testing with, those questions will tell you a bit more about what the user wants and needs. Sometimes they don't only have those questions, but they have your solutions. And so they might even state or ask a question, but then even immediately move into, you should actually do this. And when they say whatever comes after that, capture those ideas immediately. Take it, jot it down, and potentially with 95% urgency, use it somewhere in your design. Because if you go back to that initial stage with the empathy, we're trying to empathize with what this user is wanting and what this user is needing. And so by going through this whole phase and now testing it with them, we get even more information, more insight into how to further develop this app or whatever you're creating, and to further make it resonate with its user. And so, for example, if we're looking at an insect farming system, and I don't think anyone's in the insect farming system group, with Wolverine's group, basically. Now, how do you test? What does this testing look like for an insect farming system? That speaks to who are the people, what is their point of view, what ideas might resonate with them, and what are they needing out of this. And so, lastly, iteration is key, meaning that with all those 5 stages, you can jump in between. You can always go back. If something's wrong with your point of view, you want to change it to make it more appropriate, go back. If you're wanting to create more ideas, go back to that stage, do that. This is an iteration process. It allows for you to go back and forth. Now, I want to pause here and looking at timing, I thank you if you're still with me. I thank you for being with me. If there's any, if there are any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to state them, write them. If there's any points of clarity that need be, you may do so. Yeah, you may do so now. Just 2 more things. In all of this process, I want you to think in engaging with this process, I want you to think about the group that you were in and how this process applies to that group. But also to know that in the second session, we'll be going further into exploring these stages and what that actually means for you, for your app, for the development, for the refining of that process and of that development. Yeah, I will end there, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for an amazing first session. I'd just like to remind everyone, when they log in for session 2, please log in with your name and your group number, so that we can put you into your groups later again when we continue with the process later.
Cool. No, thank you, Wilkes. I do see that there is a question. If you want to stay for the questions, you're more than welcome to. But as far as I'm concerned, the session has completed, and so we're opening up for Q&A. Please do come back to the next session where we'll go further into this process. Now, the question from Canuso is, how much do you have to have done before you can go to the prototyping and testing? Really good question. Thank you so much for the question. Now, I think in order to answer the question, you would need to at least have something substantial in order to prototype. Now, the prototyping is determined on the type of ideas that you've come up with, and also where you've based those ideas. And so if you just have a look at this process, so you'll see if you're wanting to be there, and if you're wanting to be at the prototyping phase, so let me just go back. If you're wanting to be at the prototyping phase, you need to have something quite substantial in order to take to your communities, and for them to engage with it, and for them to give you feedback. Now, that being said, wherever you are at this moment in time, and if you are comfortable with where you are, go to the communities, go to your people and prototype it and go and test it. Whether you have doubts or not, their feedback will either validate your doubts or thrash your doubts and say, this is perfectly amazing. Let's go forward with the actual final solution, the creation of the final product. And so that's why prototyping and testing is really important, because as a designer, you might think that what you've just created and what you're going to prototype is something worthwhile, something that the user needs. But also, even in having that thought, it somewhat begs the question, well then, who's at the center of this design? Is it you as the designer, or is it the person or the people you are designing for? And so, just to end the response to this particular question, wherever you are, if you feel comfortable, go forward and go through the prototyping and testing. Whatever those responses are, take it as valid feedback, and this design process allows you to go back. And you'll note by that feedback whether you have an issue with the empathy stage, whether you have an issue with the defining the POV stage, or whether you have an issue with the ideation stage. And you will note as a designer where that issue is, and this process expects you to go back to those stages, to revisit what you've done, and to improve on your design, because it wants you to create something worthwhile at the end of it. If you have any follow-up questions to my response, by all means, you may respond. Saifo asks, I'm assuming you had said, if I don't have much of the creativity in terms of UX designing, is there a tool out there that I can employ to simplify the UX designing? Now, I think creativity is subjective. Just a side note. I don't think anyone has a key or a hold or a claim on creativity. Creativity is literally in the eye of the beholder. I love minimalism. I also love color. Those are two separate entities, but it depends on where I want my minimalism to come through and where I want my color to come through. Sometimes I don't love those to intersect, other times I do. So in terms of creativity, I don't think you should be concerned about the creativity. It's your ideas that need to come through. And even if your prototyping is through drawing stick men, or stick women, or stick people, let's be gender aware. Even if you are drawing stick people on a storyboard, and do you know where you have these little blocks and you draw these scenes of what is happening through empathizing with the user? Even if it's stick people, black and white, you know, with the cookie on white paper, maybe splash paint, maybe not. That is also a valid prototyping. That's a valid way in getting your idea across. In this part, you would think as a designer, but also try to get out of your head and think of yourself as a person who will be experiencing this app as well. But definitely there are online applications, online how do you say, online platforms, websites that can assist with just this creativity if you think it is an issue for you. But I want to say that creativity is the least of your concerns. It should be the least of your concerns and the least of your worries. It's your ideas that need to come through. And if you can articulate your ideas effectively with just stick people, that's perfect. That's amazing. If you produce that and your user immediately gets it, you've fulfilled your purpose. And now we're just looking for the feedback. But also just a side note, I just want to go here. Keynote, Prot are two online websites that can potentially help you if you are really interested in the creativity part and wanting to explore that. Just so I see Bilkis has also responded to some questions. But Tandwa says, I once read about the 5W questions: who, what, when, where, what. Who, what, when, why, where, and how. How would I implement this in the design process? That's an amazing question. Thank you so much. What should be noted with this process as well is that even though there are stages, whatever you do under those stages is completely up to you. However you decide to ideate, to come up with ideas, whether it's using sticky notes and with the cookie or a marker and doing that, whether it's interviewing people for ideas, that's perfectly fine as well. The who, what, when, why, and how are valid questions, and those will be explored in the next session, where we ask specific questions within the empathy. Who is our user? Why are these their needs? What are we going to define? Who is this person and what is their point of view? And so those 5W questions will engage and it will come through in the second session. And Batanwa, please do come to the second session, and everyone else, because we will go through those in further detail. Bilkis had responded, yes, you would use the 5Ws to determine the stakeholders and the design. Yep, completely. It can be implemented and at the understand phase, think of it as part of the shaping of your user's persona. I echo Bilkis, spot on. Yeah, those. Thank you, Nkanyuso, for your response. Those seem to be the questions so far. I think the powers that be, Bilkis and Jonathan, since there aren't any other questions, we can pause the session and we will log on back at the next session.